Hello, Peter.
Hello, George.
How are you, Peter?
Very well, thank you.
Good. So we're waiting on Richard. So I hear what the snow in Moscow?
Not in Moscow.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But though it was forecast yesterday, it didn't happen. Actually, today, probably the best you can hope for in a winter day, because it feels winter-like. It's cold, but the sky is clear and the sun is shining. That's my favorite kind of cold day.
That's not bad. That's not bad. Richard, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you guys. I can't this is my backup headset. I can't find my earplug. And I found the right one, but it won't connect for some reason.
Okay, well, Putin did it. Okay.
I know, right? It's always his fault. Hold on, let me pull up preferences so I could just get rid of this audio, do it right. The speaker will have to be that. Okay. Let's see, guys. Can I hear you okay?
Yep.
We can hear you, and we've already got a number of people joining us, so this should be a lively conversation.
Yes.
So, as I do my customary intro, hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, and once again, our regular guest, outstanding pollster, Richard Baris, who's head of big data polls and one of the leading pollsters in America today. So, Richard, since we last spoke about 2 weeks ago, the Biden's poll numbers have continued to tank, and there doesn't seem to be any respite from this continued decline. And of course, next week, we're going to have a big election in Virginia. I think you've done some polling in Virginia, and obviously, whatever happens in Virginia is going to have a huge impact on national politics. Just show us, where exactly the Democrats lie today. So, just tell us about what you've found in Virginia.
Yeah, so this was I was dying to get into Virginia because it has I wouldn't call it a red state, but when it was a Republican leaning to purple state, Virginia had a very long, decades-long history of basically electing the party that lost the White House or, lost the election to the White House the previous year before. So if a Republican won, they'd elect a Democratic governor. If a Democratic, president won, they'd elect a Republican governor. This track record goes back for a very long time. But Democrats are less flexible in their behavior. I would say I'm, trying to be nice here, but, Republicans are more moderate. I really, that's just the reality. You have a certain candidate or a certain swing nationwide. Republicans are more likely to move, in different directions, where Democrats are much more rigid. So I was curious, now that this has moved to, a light blue to kind of getting darker blue state, would it follow the same pattern? And in order to do so, guys, really, Biden won independence by a large margin in 2020 in the state of Virginia. So for his approval rating to fall, he not only would have to lose a couple of points for Republicans, but really do an about face with independents. And we did see when we run these voter file analysis models, Virginia doesn't have voter registration. So it's an inference model. And in 400 plus data attributes, it's very accurate. And we were seeing since 2020, November of 2020, we were seeing a pretty significant shift away from Democrats. In July, it was almost even. And now we just did it on October 21st again, and it moved into positive Republican territory. So that has to be independents either saying I'm no longer an independent, I identify more as a Republican, or just party swapping. So Biden, what we found in the poll really did shore up those models. So basically, Joe Biden's lost at least 10% support in the state of Virginia. Democrats above, overall should have about an 8 to 10 point statewide edge. And that edge is gone. That's the key here to remember. And that's why this is a nail biter, really. I actually think the momentum is probably on Youngkin's side. We're still pulling it right now. I decided for the locals community, whatever we do with CDM.press, Creative Destruction Media, I wanted to keep going to see if this would shift any one way or the other. Youngkin has a massive lead with independents, depending on the models we have. This electorate cannot be anything less than, D+2 from McAuliffe, or he's going to lose. It really is that simple. If this is an R edge in any way, shape, or form, R1 or even, then Youngkin is going to win. So that's it. There's just no other. Well, it's simple math.
The interesting thing for me is that if Youngkin loses, and let's just say it's razor thin, okay? Yeah. I mean, they're up all night into the morning. That's still for Republicans, that's a victory, because this should not be that hard right now. Okay,
that's right. Yeah.
I mean, okay, I have another question. Maybe go ahead, you first, George.
No, the big question here is, of course, fraud. We know that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. What are the likelihood of fraud in this election?
This is what has always been such a the conversation itself in the media was a fraud. There is always fraud. I mean, there is always election fraud. This idea that this is like, some conspiracy theory is crazy. And I would point people, it's almost been scrubbed off the internet, but you could still find it if you look hard enough. In 2014, Ed Gillespie nearly beat Mark Warner in the Senate election. All right. And the polls showed Warner was going to win this thing 7 to 15 points. I mean, it wasn't close. So this election came out of nowhere. And Dana Perino is on the Fox News special report panel, election night coverage. And there's good old Bob Beckel, all right, who at the time, sadly, was suffering from an addiction to pain pills. And he took how many too many pain pills that night. And he just blurted it out. And he's like, Dana, I hate to tell you, Ed is going to lose. I've been doing this for years. Everybody knows what Fairfax County does. They're holding back to see how many absentee ballots they need. And don't you worry, we're going to find those ballots, right? And everybody on the panel is just like, did he really say that on television? So without a doubt, Youngkin has to win this thing by a pretty good, solid win, because if it's up to Fairfax, then that's it. I would say the good news for him is, and if we got a second, really to explain Virginia and how it changed over the years. Loudoun County, a DC suburb, right, west of Fairfax, used to be a Republican county. It's highly populated. It's an affluent county. Because of education, migration, and immigration, it has changed to a Democratic county. If he can, I think Bob McDonnell was the last Republican to carry Loudoun County in 2009. If Loudoun course corrects and becomes a even mildly close situation, then we're going to be in for a nail biter of a night, because the rest of the state is enough to put Youngkin over, even with Fairfax. But it needs to be close. There are specific issues in Loudoun County during this election. And what we did see when we polled, we've got a pretty solid sample from Loudoun, basically oversampled it to see what was going on. And there's no doubt it's going to move to the Republican. The question is how much. And if it does, you need that to offset Fairfax. And that would be, my point is that would be enough. If Loudoun's a Democratic blowout, then Youngkin could get, they could snatch this thing out from under him with a couple thousand absentee ballots. I'm serious. Richard, he's got to win by a pretty good size.
Richard, if Youngkin does win, what is the conclusion to draw? That it's because of Joe Biden? It's because of the messaging of the Democratic Party? What is it? Okay, is it the attraction of Republicans? What is it in your mind?
I think it's a bit of a combination. The media will say, or like the Mitt Romney media will say, "Oh, see, don't be like Donald Trump and you can win Virginia." That's not what's happening here. The percentage of people who told us, now they're aware of the reports in Loudoun County. You have critical race theory. It's coming in, bounces between the third and fourth issue with public education. It swaps with coronavirus. So what happened here is 3 out of the 4 top voting issues, the issues that are most important to people's vote, are pro-Republican issues. Democrats wanted this election to be about healthcare, the pandemic response and Medicaid expansion. That is what they were trying to do. That's McAuliffe's entire campaign. It didn't happen. Inflation and jobs in the economy is number one. Cost of living, taxes, and inflation was number two. Three was coronavirus, but tied with public education. So, I mean, the issues just, reality always wins is a phrase I use, but it's true. Even Virginia, what I think that state has 6 or 7 of the top 10, highest counties per capita, high wealth, basically. Even this state is having real trepidation, Peter, about the future of this economy and this country. And they're worried about the way things are going right now. And then you have a very, very, very fired up Republican base that cares about education. And I mean, that's going to be good. That's going to probably make up 13 to 14% of Youngkin's entire coalition. And that's not typically the case.
Yeah, don't poke parents. I think that's the lesson here. Don't poke the parents.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, though, because I also suspect that the media will interpret any defeat as, it's because of Manchin and Sinema. They've been blocking Biden's agenda. And if only Biden had been able to press his agenda forward, the Democrats would have won Virginia. It's all the fault of these damn obstreperous Democrats and, of course, the horrible Republicans. But that will interpret it as because Biden has failed to enact the agenda that he has promised.
Richard,
they're going to find a scapegoat. They're going to find somebody. Oh, go ahead, Peter.
I'm glad George asked that question because that was going to be my question. George and I talk to each other too often, I think. It was an excellent question. It's an excellent question because that's a question I wanted to ask. Go ahead, Richard.
They're going to find somebody to beat up. They are. I mean, there's going to be somebody to blame. There always is. They'll go to the microphone and maybe the White House. They'll get asked a question by the press corps, and they'll say something like this: "Well, Virginia's got a long history of being independent and going against the party in power, but if it wasn't for so and so or something, right?" So the straw man will come out after the but, and it is very likely because you saw what they did over the weekend. They called, they've had Barack Obama on the ground, even trying to prevent this embarrassment. But I think in the end, even if McAuliffe ekes this thing out, this is not a good sign going into 2022. This is a horrible sign. This state was the only state to continue to move Democratic during 2017, leading up into the midterms. Every other battleground state in the country was moving to Trump and Republicans. We measured party affiliation monthly back then. And even New Hampshire, for the love of God. I mean, so this is a state we would have expected to continue. McAuliffe should have ran away with this thing, 7 to 12 points. He's a former governor. Everybody knows who he is. When this started, he was popular. He had a favorable image. Now Glenn Youngkin's image is better than his.
Well,
all right. Could I just step in because we have a question here, a very good question from Drearia Spider, and she has a question for Rich. Are the local media trying to bury the Loudoun rape scandal, Hunter Biden laptop style? And if so, how effective is the suppression in Loudoun and statewide? What do you think of that?
That's a really that's a great question because I do think they were trying to do that without a doubt. If it wasn't for the Daily Wire and then other people seeing the Daily Wire report and saying, "Hey, what's going on here?" Then I don't think we would have known. This would not have been, this big issue. And it is working to some degree because certain voters get their source of information from outlets and they typically stick with those outlets. And if they see something that isn't in their orbit or, we like to reaffirm our own beliefs, folks, right? So, if you read the New York Times or the Washington Post, you're not going to hear about the story, or at least not in the proper context. So I think it is working to some degree, but it isn't preventing people from knowing. When we first started to poll, only a third told us they were aware of these reports. Now we're approaching 50% now. So half the electorate will be aware of it. And that's a big deal. And we do break down by parental status. When we ask, have you heard about it? Oh, and by the way, do you have any children? And what the relationship between those demographics and who they're going to vote for is significant because this is a group, like you said, don't poke the parents, right? This is a group that Joe Biden won handily in this state, supposedly anyway, if you believe the exit polls. So now Youngkin is creaming McAuliffe among these people. 48-38 with leaners, it's 52-39. McAuliffe barely gets anything. Also, what's worth noting, and this is probably due to these local issues, the Hispanic vote has swung considerably. I mean, McAuliffe still leads, but Northam beat Ed Gillespie by nearly 35, I think it was 35, 40 points among Hispanics. That is not going to happen. McAuliffe barely has a lead. And I did see another poll where Hispanics were actually backing Youngkin. We didn't find that, but we did find it was pretty close, 51-40. That is not a normal margin. And then Youngkin is also improving upon his white vote share that Ed Gillespie got. Ed Gillespie won it, but he won it, I believe it was 51-42, something like that. And we're looking at a margin with McAuliffe in the 30s among whites. He's in trouble.
Is there anything, is there any affirmative element to this election, voting for someone you want to vote for instead of voting against someone or against an idea, against the current president? I mean, is it all just negative? Is that what's going to determine the outcome?
I think definitely on the Democratic side, when we asked about issues, other got about 5%. And then we asked people, go ahead in a couple of seconds, say what your other is, or if it was online, write it in the text box. And when we put the word cloud together, only on the left did we see things like, stop Glenn Youngkin, stop Trumpism, things like that. There was on the right, ironically, abortion was, abortion rights, religious liberties. Those were really minor others that some people picked, but we didn't see there is a certain affinity towards Youngkin that is building on the Republican side. I think people underestimated him. And now there are some Republicans, when we started, it looked like he was trying to win the suburbs by sacrificing part of the Trump base in Western and Southern Virginia. And I was thinking, we're going to find out whether or not that was a mistake. But he has shored up his support with those Trump areas. So I think there's a certain liking it. They're warming up to him, is what I'm saying. I think at first, a lot of Trumpers were like, I don't like this guy. He straddles the fence. He looks a little bit too Romney to me, but he's not. He turned out to, he ran a smart campaign and people are starting to actually like him. Terry McAuliffe always had a negative stain that followed him around. It's his association with the Clintons. So there's, you either like him or you can't stand him. But not too many people are telling us they're voting for Terry McAuliffe because they're just in love with Terry McAuliffe. That's not what's going to win it. There's a concern, the Democrats have this on their side when it comes to certain voters. There's that Medicaid expansion they're concerned about. And then the pandemic. The problem for Democrats is that pandemic response, when people are picking coronavirus now as their top issue or vaccinations, going into 2020, guys, it was overwhelmingly a Joe Biden favored issue. So I'm telling you coronavirus because I'm afraid of the virus and I want somebody to be responsible, with the response, the pandemic response. Now it's much more divided. They could pick coronavirus or vaccinations and then say, because I oppose all of this nonsense now. And that was not the case, going into 2020. Apologies for that. That was not the case going into 2020. Joe Biden had basically 80% of people who told us coronavirus was their number one issue were concerned about it and were likely to be anti-Trump, But this time around, if somebody tells you it's a vaccination, they may be complaining about a mandate. If somebody tells you pandemic response, it may be because they're afraid the economy is going to shut down again. So it's very, very different this time. And I think Democrats maybe looked at the map, and we talked about this last time, right? Maybe looked at the map and just said, we have nothing we can tout. There is nothing we can run on. So we have to try to just force everybody back in this pandemic box. And it doesn't seem to be working.
Or just there's a question here. I want to a very good question from Ryan Bodouan. And it goes back to what you were talking about a moment ago, Rich, which was about Youngkin. And he's saying, what kind of a figure is Youngkin? What should we expect from him? More DeSantis or more Noam Hutchinson? So he's run a good campaign, but which one is he? I mean, is he in the Noam Hutchinson, I guess, Romney category, or is he more like DeSantis? What do you think?
I think he's where I would put him right now, I would say probably somewhere in the middle. I don't think he's going to be like a Noam kind of character. It was kind of on the fly just to prove a point, but I showed everybody, this is Youngkin's financials. This is where his money is coming from. This is where McAuliffe's money is coming from. And one thing that did surprise me about Youngkin is that he took a lot of money from himself, his own business. He wants it. What his filings suggest to me is that Youngkin wants to be able to do what Youngkin wants to do. So I'm not going to take as much money as like Asa Hutchinson would take from business interests. And he didn't, so it was actually surprising. It's not your typical Republican gubernatorial campaign. He got money from himself and he got money from the Republican Governors Association. And then the rest, a lot of it is low dollar contributions from Virginians. I mean, if you compare in-state versus out-of-state, Youngkin is absolutely raising more from the people of Virginia. So what does that mean? I don't know. We're going to find out. I would not put him at first I did, but I think I was wrong. I wouldn't put him in the Chamber of Commerce Republican category where he's just going to basically be that kind of old school. Yeah, maybe he does. That turns out to be the case. I'm just saying his filings look a little different than typical candidate like that.
But he has distanced himself from Trump. I mean, it's noticeable. So,
my question. He took my question.
Well, I mean, I could expand on that. At first I thought, I'm looking at this, for instance, the 7th congressional district is a battleground congressional district. It used to be represented by Eric Cantor, who was the House Majority Leader. David Bratt beat him in a primary about immigration, didn't even see this guy coming, got walloped by 8 points. And then David Bratt represented it until 2018 when Abigail Spanberger, a former CIA, clandestine, whatever she is, you never trust one of them, if you ask me. I'm just saying. But she beat David Bratt and then nearly was defeated in 2020 in that very first reelection. She had to defend her seat. 2.5 points. We're looking at this district now, and I was just talking with Robert from Trafalgar, and we were comparing. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Which is the 7th looks gone to me. Abigail looks like she's gone. And I'm looking at another district, the 10th congressional district that Democrats won by 12 points. Looks way closer than it should be. So that's the environment we're in. And I was wondering whether Glenn Youngkin, in the beginning of this thing, it looked like that distancing from Trump cost him, because I would look in like the western region of the 7th congressional district. It gets more conservative. And his support there was not as strong as a generic Republican, for instance, right, in the congressional district. So, I'm thinking, is this by keeping Trump away? Did he do this, right? In the Shenandoah Valley, it's not as strong. His support is not as strong. Did he do this in mountain regions? Got to go for him big. It's 20% of the vote. It's got to go for him big if he's going to win a statewide election. But over about, the last week and a half, that did change. So in the end, we may all be saying he was able to improve his performance in Loudoun County with not sacrifice the Trump base, because he really hasn't put down Donald Trump. He just doesn't want to be closely associated. He didn't want him in the state. I would have told, if it was me, I would have said, you know what, Mr. President, you want to run around Western Virginia, Southern Virginia, knock yourself out. I'm not going to appear with you because I don't want to upset Loudoun County. But if you want to do it and tell people to vote for me, God bless you, But, again, it's easy to quarterback it, right? Monday morning quarterback. Yeah. He may be the smart one here. We all may be sitting here next week like, what a genius.
Okay. Let's talk about another former president, Barack Obama.
Well, there's a follow-up on the Youngkin before we go on to a former president, which is again from Ryan Baudouin. And he's, he kind of echoes, I think, what you're saying, Rich, which is Youngkin has to tread lightly in Virginia due to its safe left lean, he can't be too controversial with closeness to Trump. Doesn't mean that he's anti-Trump. So
that's exactly right.
I think kind of that's about right. Yeah. Anyway, go on, Peter. Yeah.
Let's talk about Barack Obama, and it's something that you said at the very beginning of our chat here. What he had to say was just ridiculous, and I think completely out of context. Okay, I mean, voter integrity and all of this, of course, is very important, but that's is what you've already told us here. That's not what this campaign is about, and so that's the DNC, the Obama wing of it, which I think is really interesting that he's really stepped into Clinton country. Okay, I'm interested in that dynamic, what's going on behind closed doors. But what you said earlier resonates with me a lot, because what Obama has done is brought a national message to a local campaign. And it seems to me it's not a fit. Okay, I mean, okay, he's the former president, maybe popular with some people, but he didn't add, or maybe he even took away, but he didn't really move the needle on this election whatsoever. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that he does not appear that Barack Obama came in and stopped the sliding, because it continued. You know, the momentum for Glenn Youngkin continued after Barack Obama stepped into this election. You know, I think it's really what you just said. Yeah, there are national implications. And yes, it does tend to be more true about Virginia, that the gubernatorial election is slightly more national, or I guess it's DC's right around the corner. It has national, an impact, working with the government so closely right there, and the economy so intertwined. But at the end of the day, I really do think it's still, the old Tip O'Neill saying is really true about gubernatorial elections. All politics is local. And with an election like this, they're not concerned about what, Barack Obama wants them to be concerned with. That's the problem. He wants to inject these issues that reinvoke Trump. And people are like, look, Donald Trump is gone. My inflation is the problem, right? My wage growth not keeping up with inflation is what I want to talk about. I don't care about Donald Trump saying the election was stolen anymore. I just don't care. That's what people are saying.
Well, let me have a follow-up here, which you seem to be implying. Of course, we have to wait for the election results, okay? But with that on the horizon here, it seems to me you're saying, and I hope you're saying this, is that by nationalizing everything the way the Democrats do, they want to nationalize everything. The police, they educate, they want everything nationalized. Okay, that's their what drives them. But it seems to me Youngkin he's being very, very nuanced. Okay, and I think that's what needs to happen in 2022 and 2024, depending on who's running here. A more nuanced approach appeals to all politics is local, because the way the Democrats do it, you bring in a has-been big roller. It's more they play the celebrity politics thing, which doesn't fix your wages or inflation or supply lines or your kids' schools. Okay, I mean, do you say this is no matter what the outcome of the election is, this is one of the conclusions, to be a little bit more nuanced, as opposed to having the marching in lockstep message for the entire country, all of the Democratic Party?
Also, the being proactive versus being reactive. So when Democrats try to make these national elections, environments, what they're really trying to do is get Republican candidates back in the box where they make the news cycle and Republicans react to the news cycle, and that's a campaign that they can control. And I think Glenn Youngkin has done a good job of saying, you know what, I'm going to run it the way I'm going to run it. I'm going to talk about what I think the people of Virginia want to talk about, and I'm going to keep it local and personable. And that's really, it may be new that we're getting back to, someone got back to that kind of campaigning, but it originally is how campaigning for a gubernatorial election is supposed to be. I think we got very, very partisan, hyper partisan, and everything is national. And that's the way it's been for years, and we got used to it. And then here comes Glenn Youngkin, and he just says, no, I think I'm going to talk about the issues that the state voters want to talk about. And very smart, calling for an investigation and allowing account. Not only did he's not being reactive there, he's being proactive. It's a perfect example. I'm calling for an investigation. Somebody allowed the sexual assault to happen. They covered it up. Another one happens, and because of it, some people can't get away with it. If you're a reader of the Washington Post, or you're a reader of the New York Times, and you watch CNN or MSNBC, You saw that tweet or you hear this press release, you go, what the hell is he talking about? I didn't hear about this story. What sexual assault? Then they go dig it up. And people say, whoa, how could this possibly have been allowed to happen once and then twice? So, I mean, fair-minded people, it's a statewide election. That doesn't invoke partisanship. That is a local election where you can really appeal to an independent voter, and they can, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a Biden voter. She's got 2 kids. She's in her 40s in Loudoun County or 30s in Loudoun County. She has 2 children. Maybe her daughter is in the 10th grade or heading into the 9th grade. I mean, she voted for Biden last time because she didn't like Trump's attitude, everything the media said about Trump, but she is not down with this. And then she starts thinking about gender neutral bathrooms. Why are we doing this? Did we pass a law? Did I vote on this? Was this a referendum? Which people should also go and look at the results of the polling that we did do for CDM Media. It's not even close. If this stuff that they are trying to push was up for a referendum, it'd go down in flames, gentlemen. Nobody wants to share locker rooms. Nobody wants to share bathrooms. Yeah. And you're not a bigot to be concerned about it. I mean, the majorities are overwhelming. They're overwhelming. So 60% of the state of Virginia nearly is bigoted. Get out of here. This is just crazy. It's crazy.
So it's just a interesting follow-up to what you were talking about a moment ago about Obama and the impact of Obama. So Dreary Spider now raises the question that Obama ads and the tens of millions of dollars stop the bleeding in the California recall doesn't seem to be working in Virginia. And I guess he puts, Dreary is right, he or she puts forward that the historic GOP roots in Virginia would kind of ensure that this strategy isn't working in Virginia. I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah,
why did the Obama thing work in California? It doesn't seem to be working in Virginia.
Yeah, I think they actually answered their own question, right? So in California, what worked for them, we had that recall tight. It was tight a month before. Republicans blew it. But part of that is they're scary to some people in California. In Virginia, they're not. Glenn Youngkin isn't scaring many people in Virginia, right? Maybe Donald Trump did in some areas of Northern Virginia, but California is just a very different state. And there's still traditional strongholds in Virginia that are Republican. Loudoun County may have gotten more Democratic, but believe me, maybe somebody now that woman we were just talking about, right? But her father is still voting Republican. So there's still roots. There's generational shift that has happened in California. Very different demographics, by the way. The shift that's happened in California, that's been 30 years in the making. Virginia just turned blue. I mean, there's still very, very different atmosphere there. And George W. Bush
won Virginia in 2000 and 2004. So that's right. Recently as that, 2004, it still went.
And in California, which I'm from California, Newsom's people played it really well. I have because it stopped being a recall. It turned into Stop Larry Elder. I mean, it was just a narrative shift. Okay. And I actually kind of like Larry Elder, a lot of things he has to say, but he was just painted as a radical right winger.
Yeah.
He's not. Okay. And of course, going full circle as we always do, I don't know how long I'm going to be talking about Trump, maybe decades still. Okay. The Democrats were very, very effective in tying Elder to Donald Trump. Okay.
And he's toxic there, Peter. In many areas of that state. Yeah.
Hey, I lived in Orange County. It was Republican when I lived there. Okay.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah. Right.
Very different. Very different now.
Yeah. 1988. I mean, George H.W. Bush still won California. I mean, it used to be solidly Republican. I mean, it's the one state, all Republican candidates could expect to win. And, Nixon, Reagan, they all came from California. But
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Reagan's ranch is in California. I mean, guys, it's funny, but Orange County, Republicans have been playing that defensive reactionary strategy for a long time. Orange County is a perfect example of why that doesn't work. You're going to retreat to San Diego and Orange County, but basically cede the rest of the state and try to defend this tiny little Southern California geography. It wasn't possible because, of course, demographics bleed over, right? Things bleed over. Industry bleeds over, and industry can dictate the kind of communities that come and follow. Republicans never really understood the politics of immigration and the politics of economics, which is like, I know, weird. It sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not. Different industries build different communities. And if you're going like George W. Bush won Virginia by 7 points in 2004, nobody realized the impact that the government, the public sector was having on Northern Virginia. Nobody said, you know what, maybe in a couple of years, Loudoun County is not going to go our way anymore. Maybe we should think about manufacturing in Northern Virginia instead of professional services and government contractors. And they're very short-sighted, and you have got Democrats who are not. Look at what Governor Cooper in North Carolina is trying to do. Apple in Wake County. He would love an Apple base in Wake County. Democrats can't. They have to have a little bit greater than 65-35 split in Wake County to win the statewide. And wouldn't it help to have thousands and thousands of new Apple jobs in Wake County? And then those people are going to build homes and have children. And they're smart. They're smart. And Republicans want to rely on the goodwill of prior generations, or at least that Republican Party did. And look what it did. I mean, it lost them the largest state in the country, which used to be theirs. That is what happened, and they just watched it happen.
Well, what happened is that and this is so germane because this is something that George and I talk about incessantly, is that Republicans, they're not all conservatives. That's the problem. Okay, they've abandoned conservatism.
That's right.
If you look over the last 40 years, and my pet peeve is always libertarianism, but you see Republican conservative, they're just drifting apart until there's a gaping gap between the two. And I think that's part of that reactive messaging that you're getting to here, because they're not sticking to their core values. Okay.
Yeah.
In the case in Virginia, when you say same-sex toilets and locker rooms, and you actually direct the question to people, do you want that? And he's like, well, of course not. Okay. But if you don't direct it that way, you're never going to get that answer.
And Peter, like you said, I mean, really, if they did stick to their core values, they wouldn't have these problems. So if George W. Bush was really a conservative, he would not have established a bunch of new agencies, Department of Homeland Security, all this other, all this giant bureaucracy that needs to live, and it needs people with degrees to run it. And where's it going to go? You could put it in another state, fine, but you know what I mean. You're going to bombard. If people were really what they said they were, Northern Virginia would not have been bombarded the way it has been over 10 years. And I'll say this, I don't know how much, really, but backstory I should go into, but we originally did, because I'm from the North, I'm from New York City, and then, I went into the Army and realized there's a whole other country out there. And it's just a wonderful place. And I like changing seasons, but I like the South's culture. I like how the South is freer. You don't realize you're from New York or New Jersey. You don't realize you're not really free until you go somewhere else in the country. And then you realize that other people live more like an American should live. Right. So we were going to build in Virginia, the very county that we originally loved, first got married, went to Virginia together. I wanted to show her all the history. We said, you know what, one day we're going to build a house here. By the time, the kids come, life happens, by the time we're ready to just build a forever home, that place is a dump. And it's a dump because of government, big government. And it started out as a wonderful place where contractors would come in, guys, and build their homes. And then, 10, 20 years later, things just, devolve, and it's now a disgusting, neighborhood. It's sad, it's not a ghetto, but it is not, the green, green in the spring, gorgeous snow in the winter. I can't even describe how Virginia is a beautiful state, and there are parts of it, that just, you've lost it. If you're from New York, There are other areas like, originally I remember when New York, you had always had New York City and Buffalo, but parts of New York that were just gorgeous. And then that turned into a dump. It's just, anytime you allow it to expand like that, they like destroy these communities. And that part of Virginia is a great example. It's just outside of Northern Virginia. Even Loudoun County, parts of Loudoun County now are not as, it used to be gorgeous, Loudoun County. I know people who still live there today, and their neighborhood may still be good, but there are other neighborhoods where there are not. And then they turn a blind eye, to because they like the immigration. They want it. So they turn a blind eye to the negative aspects that came along with it. MS-13, plaguing areas in Maryland and Loudoun County. Those used to be gorgeous areas. And now look at them, but again, my point is they're smart because they know how it will change the landscape. And economics and immigration really are about politics.
Well, that's it. And that's what's interesting about immigration, because 1994, Prop 287, Californians voted overwhelmingly in favor of Prop 287, which basically cut off all government services to illegal immigrants. Yeah. And of course, that was overturned by the courts. But it's kind of interesting that was the kind of the last moment in which California might have stayed in the Republican column. And it seemed briefly that this was Pete Wilson, who was the governor of California at the time, would be catapulted to the presidency. Didn't happen that way, but there's no question. I mean, the Republicans are beholden to the Chamber of Commerce. They get a lot of money from all this business side, and basically they haven't until Trump. They really didn't put up any kind of resistance to the let's bring in more immigrants movement. I mean, we had George W. Bush twice sought to pass comprehensive immigration reform, or in other words, amnesty. Then you had Jeb Bush talking about immigrants, expressing their love by breaking into the country. And you think if Trump's gone, you kind of wonder how long will it be before the Republicans once again embrace the whole comprehensive immigration reform nonsense.
And it's about, guys, it is all about politics, and it's all about underclass voting, because they don't want Venezuelans. They don't want Cubans. The Biden administration will do everything in their power to keep those two ethnic Latino groups out of this country, including going to the microphone and saying, you will be what? Are you going to fire on boats coming from Cuba? Is that what you're suggesting? Yet they at all costs, you will be stopped. You will be turned back. They don't do that at the southern border. So what is it about Venezuelans and Cubans that is such a danger? They pose such a danger, right? They're the only group of people who can't illegally migrate here. No, they vote conservative. And that vote in Florida scared the hell out of Democrats in 2020. 75,000 is a big number, in the state of Florida. I mean, that's a big number, guys. And Donald Trump actually lost some support among whites in central and northern Florida, but he won the state by more than double the margin he won it in 2016, because he added hundreds of thousands of votes in southern Florida, which is the Democratic stronghold. He came just as close as George W. Bush 2004 to carrying Miami-Dade County, slightly closer. And George W. Bush ran against both times. He won it by 6 points. He lost by 6 points in that county, but they were very, very much more white than they are now. And, it was much more Jewish, upper class. Now it's, much more Hispanic, and yet Donald Trump was able to match that performance.
You're probably familiar with the name Chuck Rocha. He is he's a Democratic strategist, but he strategizes to capture the Hispanic vote. You probably heard there was this Rising program with Crystal and Sagar when they were on the Hill. They left and they've started on their own. But they had Chuck Rocha on very, very often. And I was fascinated by what he had to say, because he was trying to convince Hispanics that they are natural Democrats. Of course, Ronald Reagan said that they're actually natural Republicans, okay? Yeah. And the more you listen to Chuck Rocha, being an expert on his own, he is Hispanic himself, the more I realized, if they actually got a different different message and left the plantation, would be a formidable force for the Republicans. But very few Republicans seem to be aware of that. And how do you account for that? Because I lived in Southern California. Hispanic people are very conservative.
Yeah. It's great. It's a great question. And I think that, if you go back to 2004, the exit polls are wrong. Bush did not win 44% of the Hispanic vote. He probably won around 38 to 40. I mean, everyone cites that number, but in reality, when you break down the math, it doesn't jive. I think what happened is that we were seeing a trend among Hispanics to Republicans, especially working Hispanics, family Hispanics. And then the financial crisis happened. And that is when the Hispanic vote really started to lean hard to the Democrats. Republicans got the blame for a Democratic program destroying the economy. And who did it hurt more than anybody? It hurt Hispanics. There's been study after study that showed they took a disproportional hit. And Nevada's a great state to point this out. That was a state where Republicans did very well among Hispanic voters before the financial crisis. And then it really just started to lean very hard. It's only in the era of Donald Trump did Republicans start to cobble some of that coalition back. So I think what happened, there's some Hispanics are very diverse. So it really does depend who you're talking about, right? But there are some that come from countries that are state-run countries. I mean, very powerful states, and they want services. They want government services. And then there are some that come from countries that also, but have now felt the ramifications of those policies. So the Venezuelans, the Cubans. So they went down that road already, found out, as one Florida voter told me, I've heard these false promises before. That's right. So when we were polling in Florida, it's the first election as an American citizen, naturalized from Venezuela. And by all accounts, you would think he would vote Democrat. He'd be a Democratic voter. They were not. They were heavily for Trump. And when I asked him, why? I mean, he was Republican across the board. And we asked him, and his response still sticks to me. I've heard these false promises before, and they lead to disaster. So I think we're talking, you have to look at the background of each specific Hispanic group too. And then what generation are they in? And I think now that the financial crisis is kind of out of the system, you are seeing, a move again. I think that Democrats, they need all of these new people to come in, because the longer Hispanics stay in America, the more they politically mature, just like every other ethnic Catholic group that we've ever studied. And they can't have that. They just, it's sad.
But I think it's a very important point, that I think that if you're receiving government services, I think that trumps your conservative values. Because,
absolutely.
Of course, you may have all sorts of conservative views about religion, about abortion, gender, and so on. But if you're getting money from the government, I mean, that's going to be the more important. I mean, the same applies to African Americans. I mean, basically, they're pretty conservative. They're conservative on family issues and whatever, but they vote overwhelmingly for the Democrats, because the Democrats promise all manner of government services, including, affirmative action, preferential hiring, and, minority issues. So it is ultimately, what you've got tangible in your hands, then values, I think, determines how you vote.
I think too, it's about survival. I mean, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what's on the very bottom, right? I mean, you just need these basic things to survive. The first immediate need is food, shelter, water, right? I mean, so Democrats provide this stuff to these voters. Everything else that's higher up on that hierarchy of needs, becomes about values and self-actualization. That's later. You can't even get there or worry about that until you survive, which is why I think when we do see, you become autonomous, from the government, it's fascinating stuff, but we have studied Irish, wave of immigrants in the past to America, and it always has the same story. Now, they may take a different amount of time, because I'm doing this for the book that I wanted to, Robert and I are putting together. And it's amazing. Whether you're talking about the Irish, the Italians, whatever, they come in, they get stuck in the urban machine, the Democrat urban machine. They fiercely try to keep them there as long as they can exploit them. And the minute they go through political maturation, leave, end up in the suburbs, branch out, get a college degree, get a job, whatever, then that's when it all falls apart for Democrats and they lose control. Irish took a very long time because the Irish relied heavily on jobs, government jobs. They were either cops or firemen. It's amazing. I mean, we studied this even down in professions because, like we were just talking about, economics is absolutely political. And, you know, Hispanics, I don't think we saw any other group that had, you know, similar experience. You could go back to post World War II and see very, you know, that maturation process largely underway with groups like Puerto Ricans that were in the United States. They had high enlistment rates. They got GI Bills. They were able to leave the urban machine, the Democrat, you know, the plantation, Peter, you're right. I mean, it's a plantation. They want to keep people there. And then they kind of reverted backward. And there was other waves that came in that, you know, there were other waves that, you know, supplanted those who had gone through the political maturation process. And that's why it is a different experience for Hispanics.
I'm really glad you injected that, you know, the Hispanic community is very, very diverse. We really have to pronounce here. There's even a category of white Hispanics.
We have to distinguish that when we're polling. You know, you are white, not Hispanic. All right, because there's a lot of Hispanics who will identify as if you don't separate Caucasian. You know, they will identify. No, I'm white. You know, so
that group doesn't like hyphens. Okay, we don't
at all. Yes, yeah.
Let's maybe change gears a little bit, Richard. You used the word survival about a minute ago. So, what about the Biden presidency?
You mean about how it will survive? Yeah, I think Biden is a one-termer if he even makes it through this term, guys. I mean, some of the polling, even you know, I don't think I should even call them my peers. You know, my media counterparts. All right, my big media counterparts. They can't even hide it anymore. I mean, you had these numbers with Quinnipiac again now, and we talked about it the last time we spoke together. Quinnipiac has polled again, you know, since. And it just keeps getting worse and worse for this guy. So, and Ann Seltzer, highly respected, conducted a national poll, Grinnell, I believe, for Grinnell University. You know, she had Biden in, I think, the high 20s with independents. This is Nixon territory. Gallup said that this is the worst decline for any president since
Harry Truman.
Harry Truman, thank you. Yeah, this is not normal, and people who are Democrats always want to point out the decline among Trump's, you know, numbers. But I would argue two things. One, that Joe Biden doesn't have the base and the support that Donald Trump has. I mean, that Donald Trump still has. But that's why his agenda was never really dead. He was never a lame ducker because he had this fierce group, 40%, you know, that loved him no matter what. And then two, I'd argue that the polls were just wrong. I don't think Donald Trump's approval rating ever was in the 30s, ever. There's just too many people who loved him. It was, you know, it's response biases and other flaws and artifacts in the polling that clearly led to the worst polling blunder, far worse than 16. If you look at 2020's miss, far worse than 16. And in 2018 as well, it was not great at all. The polling was horrible, and it did foreshadow how badly they would perform in 2020. But I think, you know, that there's really 2 points. You cannot compare Donald Trump's polling approval numbers with Joe Biden's for those two reasons. It's apples to oranges. But this is hitting him in the traditional way, which is that everybody realizes he didn't have a base. He doesn't have a base, right. And that you need one to have an agenda. It's incredible. It really is incredible. If it wasn't for Manchin and Sinema, the government, along with cowardly Republicans, would be acting as if this guy is like a transcendent Obama-like figure, and they give him everything he wanted, even though they should be treating him like, you know, second-term Richard Nixon, or you know, I mean, Nixon's replacement. I mean, this is the level of support this guy has. I don't know how he would even end up in a second term, even if he was physically and mentally up for it. He wouldn't be reelected. That's even, by the way, Ann Seltzer did a 2024 in that poll, and Biden was at 40% against Donald Trump. So our polling wasn't off at all. There was a huge number of someone else. So I think if there was a rematch in 2024, it'll look a lot more like 2016 than it did in 2020. There would be this, dynamic fighting between 48 to 47% of the vote kind of thing. I think that's how it would be. But yeah, and they're Peter, where they really have a problem is that Kamala's not popular. And that was the plan here.
With those numbers you just mentioned, another face-off, but that has nothing to do with an affirmation message about Biden. That's all about Trump again. Again, we go for full circle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think
Well, I think that's the thing.
Oh, go ahead, George. Yeah. Go. No, you go. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say. Yeah, no, I was just going to say that Biden's numbers reflect the fact that election, there was something deeply problematic about that election. If he had really won by the margin that we're asked to accept, that he got more votes than Barack Obama, that he did so much better in every way than Barack Obama, his numbers wouldn't be in the toilet. I mean, that's it. I mean, his numbers are, where they are. If you've just basically staggered through as a kind of minority president, Bill Clinton, like in 1992, who got, I think, he got 43% of the vote or something like, 43% of the vote, you're tanking in the polls. But Biden, we're asked to believe, had won by this spectacular margin. So it just shows that was a fake election.
Well, and also, if I could just add to that, in agreeing with George here, and that shows you the layer of propaganda that the media did for Joe Biden and the Republicans. Okay, that was the additional handicap that he was given. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Richard.
And I was just going to say, we talk about, and I meant to throw this in when we were talking about this, the concept of fraud in any election before. If we have this Virginia race coming up, Terry McAuliffe just 2 days ago says, let's talk of fraud, the big lie, right? And anyone who's talking about it, what George just said is it's crazy. It's a conspiracy theory. And then he, the very next day, yesterday, talks about Stacey Abrams in 2018 being robbed. There is no evidence of that. They don't have thousands of affidavits. They don't have cell phone video footage, the arena video footage. They don't have statistical analysis. They don't have ballots and audits and all sorts of canvases that, suggest something really went wrong here. They have none of that. Yet it is okay. It is perfectly acceptable for them to continue to claim that Brian Kemp stole Georgia from Stacey Abrams in 2018. The black vote was up again in 2018. He beat her against all odds. And this is this notion you're allowed, if you're a Democrat, you can level any accusation you want. They pretend as if they didn't spend the first 2 years of Trump's presidency claiming without a shred of evidence that Vladimir Putin somehow installed Donald Trump. This is crazy. It went from hacking machines to power grids to all sorts of just what was that? Tom Clancy kind of fabrications. And there was never a shred of evidence to back it up. But I have to agree with George, that if he really won 81 million votes, I'm looking at it from an election historian perspective. If he really won 81 million votes, if he really beat for the first time ever an incumbent president who not only increased his vote, but increased it by 10 million votes, if he really did that, then he would not be in the 20s with third-party voters or 30s.
Richard, what this all means, and George and I have talked about this endlessly. There's one thing we can all agree on, and is irrefutable. There were just a lot of ballots out there. That's the only thing you can definitively say about the 2020 election. They flooded the zone with
the zone. That's the phrase to use. And before the election, we tried to hammer this day in and day out. I had a bullet point presentation for the show constantly. This is not absentee ballot voting. This is very different. If you want to vote by absentee, you must request a ballot. This is flooding the zone. This is using the dirty voter rolls and to flood the zone with potentially exploitable ballots. And you don't even have to have some operation in place. Look, guys, 4 or 5 ballots to a single house that don't belong to that resident anymore, right? From people who lived there 20 years ago. Yeah. If you have people like Reality Winner working for the NSA, willing to throw away her liberty because she's orange man bad, I hate Donald Trump, I got TDS, it's coming out of my nostrils. If she's willing to throw away her career, her security clearance, and her liberty, if Mr. Wolf on the Senate Intelligence Committee is willing to throw away his decades-long standing with that committee, his security clearance, his liberty, if the FBI is willing to, destroy their careers to get this man, of course, people who you have made seething with hatred for this man, who received 4 or 5 ballots, are going to take a chance at filling them in and sending them back. Of course.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong?
And of course, with minimal checking, and to some extent, I mean, they just didn't have the resources to check so many ballots just pouring in. I mean, because
we weren't built for this. Our system was not built for this.
Serendipity.
Exactly. But a question here for you, Rich, from Dreary Spider, our friend. It says it took George W. Bush 8 years to fall to polling below 30% consistently. Will Biden speed run to that number in the next 3 months so that he gets to that George W. Bush all-time record?
Well, you guys, you love your show because really discuss foreign policy in a way nobody else does. The international state of anarchy is recognized, all right, because it's real. From the foreign policy situation, there's no big win coming here for Joe Biden, right? So what is going to turn this around? And then, it took George W. Bush a war that was unpopular and a financial crisis to lose that final evangelical base that was holding him up. And that's when he just cratered and, I can't stay at 35 anymore. I'm going south of like 22, right? So what Joe Biden doesn't even have that kind of love on his side. That's number one. And number two, there's no big win in the foreign policy area. He tried to get that with Afghanistan and it just backfired. Economically, everything is pointing to disaster here. I mean, you can't expect the economy to rebound the way that we did under, had Donald Trump been reelected. I think that it's important for us all to note that he had the shutdown, he course corrected, and all of these indexes, all of these employment surveys, they had rebounded and begun to then even out again. Yes, there were structural problems and there were going to be people that you gave, the CARES Act gave pandemic response assistance to who would not get off their butt until that check stopped, So there were problems with the labor market, but housing, manufacturing regained 30% in that first month, or 17%. Construction regained every job at half of the jobs that were lost during the shutdown in the very first month after the shutdown was ended. So we were on our way. And then Joe Biden takes the reins and things changed. It isn't that this is a continuation of the economic pain from the shutdown. This is Joe Biden now. And I don't see how we get out of this. It's not even a malaise. It's worse than an economic malaise, what we could be headed for. Guys, I haven't been able to get the juice box my daughter likes in 6 weeks. I mean, it's a very well-known brand. Capri Sun makes it. It's the she likes that organic water one, but it's not something that's hard to find. It's like in every Publix and every Harris Teeter and every ShopRite, whatever area of the country you're in, whatever grocery store you have. I haven't been able to get them in weeks. You can't turn these supply lines on and off like a light switch. And this is what these people just don't seem to understand. And when we are trying to get these chains rolling again, it's a Democratic administration. You have the unions jumping in. They want their chunk before anything happens, right? Whether it's trucking, shipping, whatever. So it's not going to move along like the private sector could get it moving along quicker. I don't see an out here economically. And Joe Biden can keep his $600. Stop sending that crap to me because I got kids. Keep it for you, Joe. I mean, God, the budget. Geez.
But don't you think that they're, again, never let a crisis go to waste approach? I'm sure you saw it. I think George and I talked about it separately. But I think there was an op-ed about 10 days, 2 weeks ago in the New York Times, and learning to live with less, have lower expectations. And I think that's kind of being built in here because this very pernicious Green New Deal approach, which of course is limited growth, even negative growth. And of course, if you're part of the 1%, well, if the economy goes down a notch, it's not going to hurt me, okay? I just think it's very interesting that you have this confluence of events coming together, and then there are those ideologues, these people that I say that are ideologically possessed, and say, hey, why don't we take advantage of this? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I just think that, for people to have to get used to a new norm, you'd almost need a generational shift.
We said this last time. My theory is this. I don't have much evidence, and maybe it's just fanciful thinking, but this is the third term of Barack Obama. And these are all the ideas the Obama people had. And we'll sacrifice Joe. Who cares? Okay. Let it be under his watch. Okay. To start this massive structural change. Which the law of unintended consequences is totally in play right now. They're playing with this economy like it's a toy.
I know.
Okay? I think that's a very good point, Peter, because if you look at what's going on now with this administration, I mean, we had the Justice Department where it unleashed the entire federal government apparatus against parents complaining about critical race theory. And then last week we have the Justice Department suddenly raising the issue of redlining. In other words, that idea that
all over again,
black home ownership is not the same as whites, because of racism. So bringing that old chestnut out of the closet.
They never learn.
This is all coming from Obama. I mean, that it's Obama's ideas. They're coming through Susan Rice and into the Justice Department, because it can't be. It's not Biden. This isn't really Biden's way of thinking. This is much more Obama than anything else.
Yeah, I think, that great point Peter made, Obama's third term. If you remember a lot of this language, a lot of these pieces, they should sound familiar to you if you lived through the Obama era. Now, America rejected that. After two terms of it, they said, you know what, we had enough. I remember being prosperous and I'd like to give that a shot again. So I think that's what ultimately pushed Donald Trump into the White House. It was, are we going to continue to manage the decline? Or are we going to try to make a comeback? And that really was 2016 in a nutshell. And Americans, despite many of them not liking Donald Trump, said, I'm going to root for the comeback. And that's what in Michigan and Pennsylvania, right? But this is the new norm that we used to hear about with Barack Obama. And I saw that article you're talking about. There was one that day or maybe a day after in Yahoo talking about how we're just going to have to accept that steak will be like the new champagne, and not everybody's really going to be entitled to, kind of thing. Yeah, it's not, I mean, it's just nuts. But they are serious because, you got that term ideologically possessed. They never learn. Central planners never learn. Their ideology is so important that they are incapable of learning from history. We're really going to go back to the Community Reinvestment Act to what? To support your worldview of racism, systemic racism. Didn't we see how this turned out the last time? And oh, by the way, who did it hurt? Everyone you said you champion. And we were just speaking about that. It hit Hispanics horribly, disproportionately.
We have, it's a return to serfdom. This is what it is. It's a return to serfdom where you'll be given certain creature comforts, like you won't starve to death. Okay, you'll get a lifetime membership on Netflix. Okay, and we won't stop the fentanyl from coming in.
Yeah, and I think that it would. You said a massive structural change. It would take time. You would have to, say, well, we're going to sacrifice Joe for the cause, because there will be blowback, political pushback, but it would take time. I'm just, talking about this stuff reminds me of a friend I have who came from Cuba. When he got to the United States, he just couldn't believe all the varieties of meat that we had readily available. And it was like one or two things for him, and that was it. And he didn't even really eat vegetables anymore because he just was so overwhelmed with the ability to have beef or pork or chicken or turkey. This is not the way it is in communist Cuba. He didn't remember that, right? So he now, by the way, his first election, he did vote for Donald Trump, but he was struggling. Who do I vote for? I got to understand American politics. His father is a Trumper 100% because his father remembers there used to be another Cuba. It wasn't always like this. Maybe he doesn't remember it like it was yesterday and he was alive during, and an adult, but he remembers that history. He remembers that it once was different. His parents had it differently, and his son didn't know anything else. So it's when you make these, these changes, you really do need time for people to forget. And it's like, the Magic Communities, Benedict Anderson, how you think of your nation, how you live in your nation. Over time, guys, you forget the shared, history and experience.
That explains January 6th, systemic racism, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, critical race theory. See, while they want to do this structural change, they've got you focused on all these other issues here. This is what's happening right now. And that's why, the reconciliation bill and this infrastructure thing, that's why they're having so many problems here, because there is a concerted effort to totally restructure huge parts of our society. And if they pull it off, and of course everyone's playing with the cutback from 6 to 3 to 1.9. Well, they're just grandfather clausing it. Okay. Once they get it out, it'll stay. Okay. And people didn't vote for this. They didn't vote for it, okay? Joe Biden was anointed by the Obama clan, okay? As you going back to what you said, there's no base. He has no base whatsoever. So, I mean, again, it's the small group of ideologically possessed people running the show. And Joe can't even pull it off, even in a fake studio.
You remember the moment in the first debate? It was, crazy, that first debate between Trump and Biden, but there is one moment that was very important that really, I don't think the Trump campaign, I don't think he hammered it enough later. And even, media that was more fair or even supportive of him, let it go over their head. And there was now we can look back and we can say without any hesitancy whatsoever that the warning Donald Trump gave the country to Joe himself, but really warning the country, it came true, which is, Joe, you're weak. You know it, and I know it. They're going to run all over you. You're not going to be president, Joe. People around you are going to be president. However he put it that day on that stage. And he was like, oh, get out of here. Come on, man. Come on, man. He's like, the AOC, the Bernie Sanders crowd, they're going to run all over you. You are not going to have the strength to moderate them. That is like the most serious moment in the debate that Donald Trump had. And then he, went back to being Trump and acting the way he acts, but he was making the point that we're talking about right now, which is that this was going to happen. Sadly, and it's only a matter because White Houses are like little fights, who can get the president's ear, right? There are little factions that war within the White House to try to make policy. And sometimes one faction is in the good graces of the president at one time. Others, sometimes fall out of good graces. Here, we don't really have a president to win the ear of. And it's just these factions running roughshod. And it's Obama's 2.0 team. That's it, but they're much more aggressive now than they were even during Barack Obama. And
that's right. That's what's interesting about that, because if you look at the arc of the Obama presidency, during his first term, he was quite a centrist. I mean, he was thinking about re-election. I remember very early on in his term, when he talked about, was it the DC police acted stupidly? And suddenly the mask dropped. And people suddenly came down on him because, hey, this wasn't the Barack Obama that was running in this election. He was the kind of post-racial president. He was no Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson. And he let the mask slip when he said, the DC police acted stupidly with Skip Gates, that professor.
And he didn't even have all the facts.
Yeah, exactly. He had the beer summit. Oh, no, back to the good old Barack Obama. But here they're going, full throttle with this agenda. They're not pursuing a two-term strategy. It's like they're not thinking about, hey, we have an election to win in 2024, which means we need to appeal to the center. We can't just appeal to the extremes, but that's not what they're doing. I mean, everything in their power they're doing in order to antagonize the center. So they just want to get as much done as quickly as possible, because once it's in place, it's awfully difficult to get rid of. So once you put a government program in place, it's there.
Yeah, but George is right, because this is a strategy of actually the worse, the better. Okay, because there are tens of millions of people that you can't reach. You can't reach. Okay, you simply can't reach them. So in lieu of that, just plow ahead, damn the consequences. Okay, and then we'll see what kind of ground where the dust is settled in 2024. The worst of it, quote unquote, the worst of it is behind us. Okay, because they're sacrificing Joe. He has no base. He has no popularity. He's not even liked. Okay. I mean, that's it. Okay. They have a lot of other problems, Harris and all of that. But, I really think that they really believe the scorch the earth policy is what they need now. Damn the consequences. We'll worry about it later.
Yeah, I think that they have, to a certain extent, learned a lesson from the Obama years, which is that, we got Obamacare, we took a beating in 10, but guess what? Obamacare is still here. So is it really worth trying to avoid the backlash that's going to come? Is it really worth playing the triangulation game, the moderation game? Do we want to pull a Bill Clinton, right? Do we really want? Why? We're going to get what we want anyway if we continue to push full bore. We have a corrupt media. They'll parrot anything we tell them to parrot. Right. Oh, and by the way, if Joe Biden did not really get to 81 all on his own, wouldn't you feel completely emboldened? Listen, this is the danger here of, everyone being called a conspiracy theorist and not allowing people like myself or Matt Brainerd or others to do the work that we were doing without PolitiFact coming out and smearing us, right? So if they did get away with this, guys, then all of the old conventional wisdom goes out the window because they don't have to care anymore. They don't have to, right? McAuliffe should be ahead in Virginia by 10 points right now. But it's a close race. Maybe they don't really care and they don't have to answer the public education because they fully expect they can pull it off in Fairfax County if they need to, right? And nobody stopped them last time. So why would there be any, why would we feel less emboldened to do something again in 2022, in 2024? It's just, to me, that was always the real danger. It's like our elections become mock elections. They're like holograms. They look like they're real, but try to reach out and touch it and see if it's real, right? And in the end, if politicians or one party of politicians no longer have to worry about the political ramifications of what they do because they can just fix the game, then the whole system breaks at that point. Then you have agenda.
That's what's interesting because of what you said earlier. If it hadn't been for Sinema and Manchin, God only knows what they would have pushed through. So they've kind of shattered the traditional idea that, well, you can't really pursue a major agenda unless you have a big majority. Then, no. If we've got the votes, doesn't matter, 50-50. We got the VP. She casts the deciding vote, and we can get through what we want. It's the only reason they haven't been able to do it is because of Sinema and Manchin.
That's exactly right. I mean, HR 1, they could have completely changed at this point how this country even conducts elections. Lawrence Tribe on Twitter the other day, what a joke this guy is, talking about polling numbers and how Manchin and Sinema are somehow, stepping all over the will of the majority. All of a sudden, this guy cares about the will of the majority. 8 in 10 support photo identification. And yet the Democrats would effectively prohibit states from requiring photo identification. It just happened in North Carolina. Once again, the people of North Carolina say we want a photo ID, and they get some elite to take his pen and wipe it off the books. So they care about it they care about polling numbers and popular support when it's a talking point. They don't really give it much credence when they deal with political strategy. Go ahead.
It's even worse because
It's worse.
When Barack Obama comes out and talks about voter integrity, you know what he's talking about. Okay, don't question the way we run elections. Okay, don't ask any questions. Right. That's the message.
This is the very same man who said you have to control absentee ballot voting. Whoever owns and controls the machines controls the election. This is the man who ran around the country saying, putting into the minds of voters that Mitt Romney's friends were buying the machines so we wouldn't be able to trust the tallies that came from those machines. Texas, he's really not going to win it. It's his friends buying the machines. His son has a stake in these companies. I mean, these people are so duplicitous. It's not even, that's not even a word. We need a new word. I mean, it's duplicitous, hypocritical. These words don't even begin to cover the deception.
That's why I say ideologically possessed. Because that solves it, okay? Because it is the mission. It doesn't matter what you say, what you do, and the consequences. It is the mission, and that is the only thing that counts. All the other stuff is collateral damage, okay? That is a scary person to be around. Those are sociopaths.
Yeah, you took that right out of my mouth. If we were talking about this in any other context, like, criminal justice, it would be like, these are sociopathic people who can, come up with anything to justify their actions, right? As long as they achieve the goal that they're trying to achieve, it's justified in some way, shape, or form. I mean, the list is very long on people like that. Jerry Nadler, before the 2020 election, when I would do that bullet points about how this was different this time, I would run an old clip of Jerry Nadler talking about how universal mail-in voting is just a gimmick, a fraud gimmick. It's only people who would want to commit massive fraud would support this. And he said, believe me, I'm from New York. These machines are compromised, right? That's what he says. I'm from New York. Believe me, right? So at that time, he was advocating for basically in-person paper ballot, old school voting. That is what he was advocating for, the Canadian system. And now, you're like on the cover of PolitiFact if you say anything remotely similar and you're not a Democrat. I mean, it's just crazy. Is Terry McAuliffe on the cover of PolitiFact today? With Terry McAuliffe claims Stacey Abrams was robbed in Georgia in 2018. His little stupid little meter false. Is he on the cover today? Nope. I mean, this is, I'm starting to really fall in love with
that's people. Right. But that was the thing in
ideologically possessed.
Yes, the 2012, because that was the theme then. Oh, mail-in voting. That, of course, favors the Republicans. The Republicans are going to go trolling around nursing homes, getting grannies to fill in their ballot papers, and then just simply, get the mail.
Right.
No, this is where you put it, Romney. You put your cross by Romney, and then that's it. And that was the theme then in 2012. This is a Republican racket to have this mail-in voting and so on. But I mean, this is hypocrisy is so extraordinary because these people, Nadler, Pelosi, you ask them, what were they talking about during the Clinton impeachment? Impeachment is overturning a democratic election. Impeachment is going against the will of the people. You are removing a duly elected president. They were screaming about this.
Yeah,
that was just forgotten.
He almost had a heart attack on the floor over that. I mean,
one of the interesting things that you pointed out that George and we cover a lot of geopolitics, but I think there's a very interesting parallel with the approach towards foreign policy with the foreign policy bloc and how it's being imported into U.S. politics, and it's called threat inflation. And this is what they're constantly doing. The threat inflation of certain types of people that won't take the vaccine, people that voted for Trump, people that go to Walmart. And what they do, these people, these groups, these ideas, they're targeted and as a threat. And then they constantly inflate it. Ashley Babbitt was a dangerous woman, okay? She could have, if she had got onto the floor of Congress, she would have been like the Terminator. And, constantly the threat inflation. That's what they do. Okay. They never talk about policy, do they? They talk about threats to their ideology.
There is no rational policy argument anymore. That's what we used to call it, years ago. I mean, anyone who studied political science, there is no rational policy argument. So it's you make the, to even have the discussion about whether voters make rational policy choices anymore is really impossible to have, which is something I was talking about. Yeah, because they're not getting a rational policy argument. Joe Biden didn't make a single policy argument. It was all about decency and threats to Americans, different kinds of. You're absolutely right. It was, what are we going to become as a nation? Who are we going to be? Are we going to let ourselves basically become Nazis? And I mean, this is that's not an election. And it's a far cry from my very first presidential election. Certainly wasn't an ideologue. The first one I ever got to vote in. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And I made a decision based on policy because that is what I was hearing from candidates. Where do I think my tax dollars are best used, right? This was a discussion we were having.
Which election was it, Richard? Which one? Which election?
Bush v. Gore.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, Bush v. Gore. And
my first election that I remember that I was really involved in, I wasn't old enough to vote yet, but the first election that I really followed, and I got in trouble because I would stay up late at night and watching the primaries. I was supposed to go to bed at like 9.
Yeah, me too.
Like at 1, and it was the rise of Jimmy Carter versus Gerald Ford, and that was my awakening. I was a young guy, okay, and I didn't know much, okay, but I got hooked on it from that point in time, and all the way to the present, obviously. But
yeah, me too. I was hooked before I got to vote. I was.
But it's really interesting what you're saying about it's the emotionalism, because that's, what Biden was doing in that election was spouting one lie after another in order to especially engender emotion. So, I got into this race because I saw on television Donald Trump say that fascists and anti-fascists were one and the same. Complete
very
lie.
fine people.
Absolute lie, been refuted. They're exactly the very fine people. There you've got the transcript. It's all publicly available. You look it up. What Trump actually said. He goes on repeating it. I mean, and that's the extraordinary thing and no one really cares that he lies about it. Just like he lied about the Putin, put the bounties on the U.S. service within Afghanistan. He just lies and lies and lies. But it didn't really matter, because his job was to generate hatred towards Trump. That's how am I going to win the election? Just get everybody hating Trump and get everybody out to vote.
And you can't cover on that. We found out.
No.
Yeah, well, that's I mean, I can't. I don't know how to even do it, but I was wondering if I could figure out how to share a screen. But I'll just say it anyway. But before I do, some of the most despicable behavior I've never seen in all these years now doing this. I have never seen what George just said, which was a presidential candidate, a leading presidential candidate, by the way, give his announcement video or announce back in the day. There were press conferences, guys. We didn't have Twitter and videos to put on a social media. You had to call a press conference and somebody would give a speech, hold an event. I'm running for president because it was the way it was back in the day. I would never think, I've never seen it before, that somebody would come out during that speech, that announcement, and tell a whopper as big as that, like what George just did. The very fine people hoax was not only untrue, it was incredibly dangerous. Right. It's a dangerous lie. It's not just a lie. There are lies. Democrats have been lying about, when during that very election, there was an NAACP ad, the Bush v. Gore. That was very controversial. Basically, a young girl saying that if Bush gets elected, they'll be dragging black men behind trucks again. And I remember hearing it and go, what? I mean, I was 18 years old.
They did it in 2016. They did it in 2016 too. I think it was in like in Pennsylvania or something like that. It's the same motif over and over and put you back in chains.
Put you back in chains. Mitt Romney's going to go put you all back in chains. That was Joe Biden. But to use your announcement video, and then like George said, he just keeps over and over repeating it. He gives his nomination acceptance speech at the convention and says it again. I mean, he just and Michelle Obama, by the way, was one of the most disgusting speeches I have ever seen, because it was very clearly those lies were intentional. It was very clear those lies were absolutely intentional, and she was being used as that social desirability. That was one giant social desirability campaign against white women. That's what it was. I mean, really targeted in certain areas, suburbs and other areas around the country. And then they bring on a black female former first lady to drill it home with the same lies that the old white guys were just telling. I mean, it was disgusting, because as somebody who, studies public opinion for a living and cognitive biases, it was 100% intentional. There was nothing about how I'm going to make your life better. No, it was, here is how we're going to lie and scare the hell out of these groups of people, one at a time, systematically over the course of 4 days. And here's the production we're going to put on to do it. And I just, you sit there nauseous, like, this is what we've become. It's very different, guys, than being smart and, running ads, talking, I'm going to make your life better. We're going to have better trade deals. We're going to do this with, fiscal policy. That's all gone now. There is no rational policy argument anymor.
It's how you fall on January 6th. That's everything. Okay?
But what you're saying is very interesting, because, look, there've been dirty tricks in politics. Let's say the Willie Horton ad. Let's say, okay, that's a little dirty. It was unfair to Dukakis. Okay, that's fine. But that's something different from calling a president and a presidential candidate a traitor. That goes, over the line. Right. When you call somebody a traitor, and when you say he's basically endorsing Nazis, that's not dirty tricks. That's not just, that's being unfair.
Totally different.
That is something that is serious. That generates violence. That generates hatred.
And George, importantly, to accent your point, you can't take those words back. You can't unring that bell.
Absolutely.
Okay. The dirty tricks that against Dukakis, it's politics, it's dirty trick. This is what this is doing is corrupting the political discourse, okay, and denying a rejoinder, okay, because I mean, and it tells you everything we need to know that in our discourse now, calling your opponent a traitor is acceptable discourse. That's when you're in the death zone of politics, okay, of polite people.
Yeah, and it did turn out. And I mean, it did, you could still hear me, George, right? Because this goes off of what you're both, it did turn out to be dangerous. The Russia traitor lie was dangerous. Now, we don't name them. We're not supposed to name them. The FBI has been saying it for a while. Any mass shooting event, you don't want to, bring up the suspect. But the gentleman who opened fire on Republicans practicing for a charity baseball game, shooting the House Majority Whip and and his personal detail along with 4 other people. That was direct result of those lies. Before Facebook scrubbed that man's page, we found him, we took the screenshots right before he did it. He posted that Republicans were enablers to the traitor, and somebody had to do something to stop the traitor in the White House. And what his argument was that Republicans should be punished, obviously, by gunfire, because they're not acknowledging that this guy didn't win the White House, that Putin installed him. And we have a traitor in the White House, and someone's got to do something about it. And then he gets in his van with his weapons, and he opens fire on the majority party in this country. Nobody talked about it.
Yes, sir.
Oh, well, he volunteered for Hillary Clinton, and he was a Sanders supporter, but we don't blame them. That's not the game we should be playing in this country. No.
And Steve Scalise, he has kind of a questionable background as of legitimizing it.
Right. It's very interesting that the media have never put the cause and effect together here. You remember
Never.
when they made the accusation against Sarah Palin because she ran an ad and it had, it seemed like, because she was basically saying,
the bullseye,
targeting these, the bullseye, exactly. She was instigating the assassination attempt against
and the MAGA
Gabby
bomber,
Giffords.
and the MAGA bomber in Florida. That was Trump's fault. Meanwhile, here we have the MAGA bomber wasn't placing real bombs. All right, which I know it's still serious, but I'm saying he didn't really hurt anybody. He didn't. Who was not in this to this degree, where this man decided to take semi-automatic rifles and open fire on lawmakers. I mean, how could this have gone in ideologically possessed? Going back to that again, how could you cover those other stories the way you covered them and you don't connect the dots when CNN, Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, the Washington Post, the New York Times, they were all directly culpable for that man believing that Donald Trump was somehow a Russian asset? That was never true. And the worst part is everybody knew it was never true. Everybody knew the Steele dossier was bunk. Everybody knew Russia collusion was a fraud, a hoax, and they pushed it. I mean, Maggie Haberman's source was Adam Schiff, guys. I mean, for those stories. Yep. That's why they called him the bathroom leaker. He'd sit there in committees, excuse himself, go take a leak, and then Maggie Haberman's got it 5 minutes later. I mean, this is just crazy. That's what Donald Trump Jr. He was giving his testimony. Adam Schiff got up and excused himself, and Maggie Haberman's got what Donald Trump just said behind closed doors in committee. I mean, it's crazy, And by the way, she's got to know that she's being played. And we have these reporters that are so ideologically corrupt, they're willing to become assets. So it's like, these people aren't their sources, they are their assets. It's a big difference. And that story came about, because of this dynamic and those relationships. That story was really allowed to become a mainstream story. And then it led to violence, and I'm sure you could probably find, whether it was reported widely or not, I'm sure you can find violence associated with the Very Fine People hoax. I'm sure you can.
There's an example, George and I talked about it. There's a journalist in the UK. His name is Luke Harding. I've actually met him.
Yeah. And
he came out with that, what was it, George, 3 months ago? A new evidence. New evidence
to confirm the Steele dossier. Yeah.
Right. And it was a paragraph, a picture of a printed page with Cyrillic writing on it. It's like it came from a typewriter from the 1940s. My Russian friends looked at it and they said, well, whoever wrote this wasn't a native speaker because there are errors in it. Okay. Why am I mentioning this? Did MSNBC run with it? Did CNN run with it? No, because Operation Russiagate has succeeded. Trump's gone.
That's right.
We don't need it. I mean, if Trump had been in office before the election, or if he had won the election, oh my God, we'd still be talking about it. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, it proves to us, the people in the mainstream media that peddled this, that needed, went from pings in Prague and passports and, all kinds of nonsense. And then something like this, these are the words of Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin, okay? And they let it go. They just let it go. And it's proof positive that they all knew it was a fake story for 4 long years.
That was in the Guardian, right, Luke? He was in the Guardian.
That's right. And it's in the Guardian. And you just wait, it will come back.
If necessary.
They're holding it in abeyance, the whole Trump-Russia connection, because, if Trump does indeed announce after 2022 midterms that he's running, boom, we'll be hearing once again, the whole of these stories. Maybe there's some truth to the Steele dossier, and what about all these elderly Russians who was living in Trump homes in Florida and so on? Every single cliche is going to be brought back against Trump.
And that's why George and I did a separate video on this. Christopher Steele has been brought in from the cold again, keeping their powder dry just in case. So we have the Guardian piece, we have Christopher Steele, which he should, I don't want to incite violence here, but he should never show his face in public society ever again. Okay. But so they're setting up the chessboard, just setting it up, just, just if it's necessary, they start moving the pieces.
Yeah. And, who does he sit down with, guys?
Yep.
He sits down with George Stephanopoulos, a Democratic operative, literally now posing as a journalist. I mean, it's just a Clinton era political operative now posing as a journalist. It really is incredible. And, the source of the information itself was always, how it was reported was always problematic. Christopher Steele was delivered to news consumers in this country as some former MI6 super spy, hero, when everyone that we spoke with who knew anything about him told us he had his relationship with MI6 was not strained. He was the head of the Russia desk, and they thought he was basically compromised. There's no other word. So here's a guy, Western intelligence agencies are not sure of his loyalties anymore. And he puts out this political opposition product, right? With Glenn Simpson and the rest of them piecing this all together. And it's pushed to the FBI, the main law enforcement investigative, branch in this country. It's pushed to them as an intelligence document, which is, just think about how out of the norm all of this was. And again, even if some of it was legitimately gathered, anyone who knew anything about the intel world took one look at that dossier and said, this is not an intelligence document. This is not how these documents read. It reads like a political opposition brief. That's what it reads. There's and oh, by the way, the guy who ran around collecting all of the information for it is a questionable character. So, what they were basically telling me is that, Christopher Steele was for sale and that he really didn't have a side anymore. Like that's it. So that's what they felt anyway. And you could buy Christopher Steele. Doesn't matter if you're in the West, you're in the East, he's for sale.
Since you like the term, I'll use it again, ideologically possessed. The FBI wanted something like that. They didn't care if it was true. It just confirmed their bias, what they wanted. Okay, this is what people are like when they're ideologically possessed. They will accept any information that will further their cause, no matter how absurd and ridiculous it is.
Yeah, and the evidence of that, even in the general public, was the success of Rachel Maddow during the Trump years. People were willing to gobble this garbage up. They wanted to hear these crazy stories. They wanted to be lied to. And this is a very, very real thing now that we do a lot of jury research. We have, national cases that probably people have heard in the news. So you would know what I'm talking about if I did reveal some of these cases. But every time we're going through voir dire research, Robert Barnes talked to him about this. I'll tell you the same thing. We always ask people in the potential pool and the population we're trying to get jurors from, who do you get your news from? And then what do you know about this case? Because most of the time, these are national cases you see on TV. The media has grabbed a hold of them because something is important about this case to their narrative, all right, for the time being. So there is, some established set of facts that we may know. And then there's the media, fabrications that surround the story, okay? For instance, Michael Brown's a perfect example. He never had his hands up. He never said, don't shoot. But of course, that became a mantra. We asked about their consumption of news. Where do you get your news? The Washington Post, the New York Times, cable news. Okay, which ones? The left is always the most ignorant. It's just true, because then we ask, what do you know about this case? How much have you heard? Have you heard anything at all? We want to know if they're potentially, tainted already. And then if not, we need their life experiences to know whether or not they can adequately shift through, because there is no juror without bias. It's what kind of bias that juror may have, and you're hoping to make it work in your favor and keep those who are incapable of being persuaded nowhere near your client. So it is.
Well, that's what's interesting, because it means that the left is basically, they're consuming the news they get from the mainstream media, So that doesn't provide the correction to these phony baloney stories. I mean, like the Michael Brown you mentioned, or any of the stories about Trump knew ahead of time about the WikiLeaks dump and so on. So you have to look at the internet, the alternative news sources, to get the correction. You know, the correction to all these stories. I mean, how else are you going to find out that the Michael Brown didn't say hands up, don't shoot?
And so you can't ask them.
That's what when you say the left.
You can't ask them openly, guys, about certain political things or beliefs. But I'll tell you, you ask them their news source, and that will tell you all you need to know about them. And then I can't recall a case, one of these national cases. I can't recall one when the left-leaning members of the potential juror pool were more informed than everyone else. It is always the opposite. And I hate, I'm not, they don't seem to want to know all of the details. They want to be lied to.
But see, what's different now, we've always had differences of opinion. And this is something I experienced doing crosstalk. And it's a growing concern, to be honest with you, is that if you disagree with someone, they get angry. It's not like they want to challenge you or say, well, Peter, have you thought about this? And are you aware of this? And so it means that you're this and that. It's just like, well, I'm trying to have a conversation with you. Okay. No. Okay. And it's such a blood lust approach to our politics right now. And this has only been over the last few years.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's really quite horrifying, because this ideological possession, you're living in this bubble, and you cannot see and understand anything beyond that bubble. And if it's different, then there's some insidious reason, why someone is doing something. Okay.
Yeah, right. That's what. Go. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's at the heart of what you're just saying. Really, it is that it's not just that you disagree, Peter. It's that there's something like insidious about your motive. Your motives are evil. Something about you is indecent, and that was Biden's entire pitch during the campaign. If you vote for Donald Trump, there's something wrong with you. You're not a decent person, and people would blame Donald Trump for what we're talking about now. But I would argue that Donald Trump came about because of this environment that was fostered. Donald Trump never said, if your neighbor 100%. Disagrees with you, get in his face and scream at him. That was Barack Obama who told people to do that. Remember? Over Obamacare. Because your neighbor, if he doesn't support Obamacare, he must be a bad person who doesn't want people to have health insurance coverage, and he doesn't care if you just die because you don't have the money to pay for a good physician or good care. So get in his face and scream at him, yell at him. Maxine Waters, no, they're not welcome here anymore. I mean, they really put the other tag all over the place. And
it's interesting that Biden is still peddling this stuff. I mean, every time he makes one of these addresses, he's always talking about domestic terrorism. The major terrorist threat to the United States comes from white supremacists. And he keeps repeating this. Other times he's going on about the unvaccinated who are destroying our healthcare system, endangering all of our lives. Everything he says, is in order to drive a wedge among people, to generate hatred towards your neighbor. I mean, that's really the Bidenism.
They used Colin Powell's death last week, he was vaccinated, but it must have been, I saw several blue check marks on Twitter. This is, look, now, a great general who was vaccinated, he did the right thing. He had been vaccinated, must have been in contact with one of those other people who aren't vaccinated. And I mean, the truth is his immune system was compromised. He had cancer.
Cancer. That's right.
Yeah.
That wasn't even mentioned in the earlier report.
And that's right. That's exactly right.
Well, it wasn't mentioned also is that he was a major player in starting the illegal war in Iraq.
Forgive me if I didn't cry over his death.
Yeah, George and I talked about this at length. Okay. It was a storied career. Well, he could have made history. He could have made a difference. Okay. but he didn't. Okay, and that's his legacy. I'm sorry, he died of COVID. Okay, but he had cancer. He was 83.
And for people who didn't get that recap of history last week when everybody was too busy, singing his praises, including a lot of people on the right. All right, he was the puppet, the pawn of the Bush administration. He absolutely knew he was lying to the world when he gave that speech. He knew that they were using what was his perceived credibility to push an unjust and illegal war. He did that. And by the way, for those who weren't convinced, or his level of credibility and his character wasn't enough to get them on board, oh, don't worry, we'll use the NSA and the other agencies in the British government to spy on member nations in the hope they get disturbing information that could, be used to blackmail member nations who didn't want to sign on with Iraq. So, I mean, this is not, we do this dance, guys, where we play this like this charade. You know what I'm talking about, Peter? It's this charade. He's gonna lie in state now. We're all gonna pretend he's a national hero. I'm not doing it anymore. This is a man who was responsible for catastrophic failure in foreign policy.
I read an article today by John Kiriakou, the former CIA person.
American conservative, yeah.
American conservative?
He said something I hadn't heard, that when the State of the Union address, the 2003 State of the Union address was, he had presented, George W. Bush had put in the State of the Union that somehow, we know that Saddam Hussein has been trying to purchase yellow cake to build weapons of mass destruction, and the CIA wanted to take it out. And then Colin Powell himself, he's the Secretary of State, he came to the CIA headquarters and reinserted it, but then did this devious thing of saying, our British friends tell us that Saddam Hussein is trying to purchase yellow cake from Niger. So it was Colin Powell himself, who actually overruled the CIA, who wanted to take out the reference to the yellow cake because they knew there's no evidence for the yellow cake. But he put that nonsense back in.
Outrageous. Just outrageous.
One of the things George and I talked about when we did the obit on Colin Powell is that this whole obsession with celebrity has replaced politics. Okay.
Yeah.
And that is so very disturbing. See, I don't know, maybe it's just a generational thing, but I'm not into the celebrity thing. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't have any time for it. Okay. But everything is about that. I mean, this whole Alex Baldwin story, they talk less about the victim than they talk about Alex Baldwin, which I could give a rat's ass about. Okay.
That's right.
A woman was her life was terminated at the pinnacle of her life. Okay, I mean it's breathtakingly sad to show how our values have just evaporated. I mean, we're just all in awe of drunken celebrities. Okay, I mean it's really pathetic.
And Fox News, the so-called conservative news outlet, Peter, tears seen in Alec Baldwin's eyes as he what? What about the dead woman? How about that? And by the way, that story stinks to high heaven.
Absolutely.
I got to tell you guys, prop guns. I mean, a prop gun is a gun with blank ammunition in it, blank cartridges. I mean, they're acting as if there's some kind of like difference between a prop gun and a firearm. You don't. What was he doing pointing a firearm at the director anyway? Exactly. It doesn't matter. I mean, this is like these liberals who hate guns and want to get rid of the Second Amendment know absolutely nothing about firearms. There are certain rules. You never point a weapon at anybody, loaded or unloaded.
Right.
In fact, a weapon is always loaded. You always assume it's loaded. It's a blank. Come on. I mean, it's a prop gun. Come on. There's no.
They're trying to shift the blame onto the assistant director. Oh, the assistant director told him that the gun wasn't loaded. It doesn't matter what somebody tells you. You've got to check yourself. So somebody gives you a gun, you have to check yourself whether it's loaded, and then you point it at someone.
That's exactly right.
But again, it's really a very important, broader question that is never brought up, and it's something that's very important to me. And it's something that, when things go wrong, I don't like it because of the lack of meritocracy. Where is the competence here? Competence is sacrificed for other things now, okay? And we pay the price all of the time for it, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how these people in government, they are incompetent people. They got there for reasons that are not valuable, that don't have any value. You know, you went to this school, his mother was this person. It has nothing to do with your ability to do the job that you've been assigned to. It's called meritocracy. That is a dirty word in our culture right now, and we pay for it in spades. And every once in a while, we get one of our beloved celebrities, and it stares you right in the face, and they can't see it.
It's the Jefferson's worst nightmare. Thomas Jefferson wanted what he called a natural aristocracy in America. You earn the post you earn because it's merit-based. You are the best person for that role. We're not going to be like old Europe where there's an artificial aristocracy. It's just by birth and you're given it or whatever. You're part of a certain class of people. He loathed that idea, and he was very frightful that could take a hold in the New Republic. And we have it now. I mean, Pete Buttigieg.
I'm sorry.
End of story. I mean, this guy is 11 miles worth of cargo ships off the coast of LA, and he goes on maternity leave. And everyone goes, "Oh, look, him and his partner, aren't we so progressive because they're gay and they have kids now?" And I don't care what you are, who you are. Did you ever have a job where you worked at it for maybe 8 months, at best 8 months? You suck at it. It's a new job, yet you're still allowed to leave for 2 months on vacation.
But one of the things that
Crazy.
a form of just openly insulting your intelligence is the Buttigieg and his husband laying in a hospital bed with 2 children. I think they were wearing masks.
Yeah, exactly. It was like one of those, it was like a hospital bed. And and they were wearing those chains. These are those wrist chains that you get in hospitals. So it looked like, wow, one of them had given birth. So it was such a fake picture. And the way the media cover it is as if they gave birth to twins. They announced the birth of twins. Oh, wonderful! Biology's been abolished. They announced the birth of twins.
What's
incredible?
What's so pernicious about that is that the three of us, if we say, well, isn't it absurd? No, you're intolerant. See, this is what I'm getting at. You don't believe your lying eyes, okay? So it's for me, it's very pernicious. It's insulting your sense of intelligence and telling you that your cultural values have no value whatsoever. I don't care if he's gay, if they're married and they have children. I like families, okay? But don't use this as a political cudgel to tell me about that those are values that you should accept, okay? No, I don't. And I find it offensive that you showed that picture and gloated about it.
Same thing, by the way, with Rachel Levine. You distract criticism, you deflect legitimate criticism by attempting to, again, what you just said. It's like, there's something wrong with you and your values. It's not about her being a horrible, she should probably be in jail, not leading the HHS. This is a woman who also participated and pushed for a policy that led to the deaths of thousands, needless deaths of thousands of seniors during the alpha strain of this pandemic.
She saved your mother, though.
But I was just going to say, she allowed her own mother to live outside of the rules that she demanded everybody else abide by. And by the way, it's back to merit. It really is back to being, merit-based, or it's not even mediocrity because it's incompetence here. That was a bad policy. People who followed it were not even mediocre. They were bad at it. So there was never, this concern that led for nursing homes. For people who don't know, everybody was expecting the beds to be full. There would be no room in the hospitals. So we might as well send people back to the nursing homes because we're going to have, hospitalizations too high, and it'll create a burden on the system. So that never happened, is my point. We really, with the exception of a few isolated areas, that never became a widespread problem. The Javits Center was not overflowing. Donald Trump did not need to give Andrew Cuomo an entire Navy ship. Nobody used Samaritan's Purse in Central Park. All of that was BS. And in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, they killed those people.
Yes.
They said that was government policy that led to their deaths. R.J. Rummel called that democide. That's not bad policy. It's murder.
And you're absolutely right. We can't criticize her because then you're being transphobic.
You're a bigot.
And of course,
right.
The best example of this is we are now no longer permitted ever even to mention the name George Soros and all of the malevolent, pernicious things that he does, because of course, that's anti-Semitic. If you bring up, oh, this person won an election because he was bankrolled by George Soros, hey, that's anti-Semitic conspiracy theorizing. Well, it's a fact. I mean, it's been reported in the New York Times he was bankrolled by Soros. Anti-Semitism. So yeah, that's just how the way you still all criticism.
They did that to Newt Gingrich on Fox News.
That's it.
Yeah, well, that's what George is referencing.
The former speaker of the House.
And that was
right.
Melissa, the ghastly Melissa Francis, who said, we better not bring up George Soros.
Unbelievable that, that's what, and by the way, it's funny how they seem to only care about anti-Semitism when these are like secular, self-loathing billionaire Jews who are leftists. They don't never care about anybody. If you're a Jew of faith or something like that, then you're not afforded those same.
How do you think they would deal with Norman Finkelstein? Okay, they just wouldn't know how to do it. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
And that's why he's disappeared, because they don't know how to deal with that. Okay.
But that's the thing also about Soros, is that he's not really particularly Jewish. He's never been particularly interested in Jewish philanthropists.
It's only liberals that tell me he's Jewish.
Exactly.
That's right.
Only liberals.
He's never been much of a fan of Israel. So, there's nothing Jewish about him. So that's why it's liberals who can continually emphasize, well, he's Jewish. And if you say anything about him, that means you are anti-Semitic.
That's it. Yeah, I think it was, speaking of Robert, I mentioned before, Robert Barnes. I think it was Robert Barnes who did this whole video on George Soros, detailing not just his, but his family's history. This is a man, don't give me this anti-Semitic crap. This is a man who had, his family had questionable relationships with actual Nazis, and actual people, in those crazy science experiment programs they ran. Yeah, you really have to check that out.
He was identifying Jews after the Nazi occupation of
right. That's it.
Helping them to find Jews to round up. So that was
a wealth stealer. I mean, that's picking through the ruins. I mean, it's horrible. It's horrible.
I mean, kind of to put a cap on it, because we've been going for about 2 hours here, is that we're in a really dangerous place when you're told you can't talk about things, okay? Yeah. And things that are well documented, where the New York Times 2 weeks ago talked about it, but now you don't talk about it now. Like, this is what I really fear so much, is that I lived in communist Poland in the 1980s, okay? And there was a list of things you shouldn't say, and everybody knew it. Don't say anything about it because you were afraid. Okay, that's what's happened here. George and I are historians by trade, and we both know the history of the Soviet Union very, very well. And we very often look at parallels to Soviet history. And I think, George, last time we talked about it, I said, about a year ago, we would mention it every once in a while. 6 months ago, it kind of popped up more often. And now it's really kind of in your face, just the whole Bolshevik approach to how to control a society. And I don't think it's an exaggeration whatsoever. Vladimir Putin over the weekend, talking about wokeism, he said, we already did that. Okay, it didn't work out for us. We're not interested. You do what you want to do, but we're not interested.
We'll do us.
That's right. Well, that's it, because he rightly pointed out that in the early years of the Bolshevik rule, they kind of abolished all that. They abolished the family, they abolished marriage, they kind of made abortion on demand, everything. We'll just throw everything, take down all the statues and rename everything. We'll just destroy history and start all over again. it didn't work very well in the Soviet Union. They had to go back on all that. But he said, we just don't want this. We've had enough of that experience. And I think that's a very important issue. And again, this extremism, this is part of it, like, you constantly elevating certain people as sacred. Under Bolshevik rule, we have the proletariat. That was sacred. If you were a member of the proletariat, you were, a super person. So here we have persons of color. You're persons of color, or if you're transgender, if you're gay, then you're sacred. Everyone else, you're just, garbage. I mean, you don't count. Who cares about you?
And what's important, George, as George and I have talked about, is that all of these ideas were forced upon society, and coercion was never far away. Okay, coercion. Okay, so it's one thing to spout out these ideas that do not have large public support, and actually very small, I would say. But when you have the media, you have academia, you have in the entertainment industry, they amplify it all the time. And January 6th is a form of that coercion. Okay, it is a chilling effect. Okay, this is what, and it's very much part of a Bolshevik mindset. And they were the original ideologically possessed.
Just throw this out there real quick. You said a very small minority. As you were doing that, I looked in Virginia, this whole transgender locker rooms, bathrooms, gender neutrals, 54 to 28 opposed. 54 to 28, with 18.9 saying that they're or 17.7 saying they're unsure, which, though, what you're talking about, they're not unsure. They're afraid to tell me that they don't support it. Exactly. And so that's why anytime these things go up for a vote, they go down, and they go down hard.
And the interesting thing is if you disagree, then you must be transphobic. But probably most of these people have children. That's what motivates them. Okay.
That's right. That's good. And parents.
The simplest answer is almost always the right answer.
Yeah. Occam's razor. Occam's. And you know what? This is why, and you said the January 6th thing, and I guess, I'll cap it. I'll wrap it up with this. I'll let you guys take it out. But this is why years ago, when Barack Obama vaporized Anwar al-Awlaki without a trial, I was so stunned, because there was never any evidence put forward that he was anything, by the way. I mean, we all know what we heard about him. But the fact of the matter is, the prior president's administration included Anwar al-Awlaki in the Muslim outreach program with the State Department, along with other members of CARE who were very questionable, there's no doubt about it, or ties to CARE, who had ties to Hamas, members of CARE who had ties to Hamas. But Anwar al-Awlaki was at the State Department reception dinner when they announced this outreach program. He was somebody they looked at as a young and talented imam in the Virginia area, U.S. citizen, a moderate that they could do business with. And somehow we went from that to this man being the #1 propagator, Inspire magazine, Al-Qaeda's #2 and sole source of recruitment. Never any evidence provided. And they killed this man along with others without a trial, without due process, without even being arrested. He was a U.S. citizen. Their justification was that he was a domestic terrorist. Well, that is now what they are calling people who go to school board meetings.
But the United States always does this. I mean, like in Kosovo, it declared the Kosovo Liberation Army in 1998. It's a terrorist organization. So it was listed as a terrorist organization. Then they decided, hey, we're going to use this person against the man we really hate, Slobodan Milosevic. And suddenly, hey, the KLA should form the government, and we're going to install them. Like Madeleine Albright decided to install the KLA as the government of Kosovo. This is in a matter of months. You've gone from this, it's a terrorist organization, to, hey, why don't we use them as the future government of Kosovo? So
yeah. If I could invert a phrase here, that's not who we are. I'm sorry, that's exactly who we are. Okay.
All right,
that's
Richard.
Exactly who we are.
Richard, this was another fascinating conversation. Really loved it.
Absolutely.
I'm sure our listeners loved it as well.
We got to find a way to bottle it.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're going to do it again in a couple of weeks, and then we'll be your guests. And it's always great fun doing this every 2 weeks. So thank you so much for your time, for all of your insights and the fascinating conversation. Thank you, Peter. And remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. And there's Buddy. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys, this was live this time?
This was live.
I just want to apologize because I thought it was going to be recorded and then put out later. Otherwise,
No,
I would have retweeted
we're
it.
live streaming. We're going to do both. We're going to live stream it. And then we're going to, for anyone who wasn't here, we're going to.
Well, I'll blast it out now because I would have done it beforehand. Maybe Laura did because I did see some people saying, "Oh, you're going to be on the Gaggle on my local stuff." So I thought though it was going to be recorded and sent out later. I'll know that for next time, and I'll push it before. I just didn't realize it, so I just wanted to apologize and tell you that.
Great conversation, guys.
As always, as always.
Right.
Looking
Thanks.
forward to it, guys. See you soon.